terrible day. I was going to go to Frankfurt today to do a couple things, but weather's bad. LRC isn't even there, so I can't do it. But we'll take a shot at it tomorrow and see how it's going. So I wanted to do an update on bills, kind of talk through some bills we've been talking about, and kind of talk about what's happening with them, what the conversation is around them, and then also as well, I'll talk about impeachment and kind of what the back channels are telling me and things like that. So first, let's talk about HB 208 again. So that's one of the notes. We're saying no to HB 208. So HB 208 and some earlier videos I went into this super in depth. But what HB 208 would do, it would allow the school boards continue to be NTI. So SB 1, when it takes effect here March 1st, takes away the governor's ability to suspend statutes. And there's a statute in Kentucky law that states that schools have to be in person. And so what 208 would do as wrote, what it would do is it would allow schools to do more than 10 days of NTI a year. They would just have to get approval from the governor's administration. Well, considering the fact that the governor was the one suspending the statute in the first place to allow schools to not be in person, I think it's pretty safe to say he would go ahead and allow those schools to stay NTI if they choose. And listen, I've said this before, I'm not against NTI if a parent chooses that's what's best for their child. In fact, maybe we should have an NTI option forever. I don't know, as long as the parent decides that's what's best for their child. However, we're paying $16,000 a year per student right now in Fayette County for remote learning, while private schools in the area are $11,000 a year, and they're able to be in person and not have a single COVID outbreak. But we're paying 50% more than that to have people remote only and getting a terrible education. Meanwhile, suicide rate, the therapists, the mental health program here, at least I know for a fact in Lexington, is overwhelmed. You can't get your kids in for 72-hour holds. You can't get them therapist meetings. You've got 3-4 week waits in order to get a meeting with a child therapist right now. So it shouldn't be left up to the schools to decide. They've shown they're not listening to the teachers. They've shown they're not listening to the parents. A concern about COVID, at least when it comes to schools, seems to be, in my humblest opinion, looking at the data, a irrational fear that is being created. I don't know why. And listen, one thing you got to ask yourself is, everybody else has gone back to work. Everybody else has gone back to the office. Why are teachers not back in the classroom? It just seems really strange to me, especially when you look at the numbers and see that the children and young adults are the least at risk. So it makes no sense. So HB 208 would allow them to stay in TI. Now, when you ask the person who originally sponsored this, Regina Huff, Representative Huff, about it, what she would tell you is that it's a funding bill. A lot of these bills, when you go to ask the person who wrote it about it, or they try to defend it, they do a terrible job defending it, or they completely misrepresent of what the bill does completely and 100%. So HB 208, what it does, or what she says it does, it's a funding bill, and a chunk of it is a funding bill. Now, you would ask yourself, why do they need a funding bill? Well, the way the students get their money, a large amount, half of our general fund goes to education here in Kentucky. The general fund is the general tax fund, and then schools also make money from property tax, and it goes into, half the general fund goes into a Sikh fund. It's kind of complicated. But basically what it is you are paid per student from the state an amount of money. It's around, let's say, $4,000, $5,000. And so they're paid per student an amount of money. Well, that is based upon attendance. The problem is these schools, because they've remained NTI for so long, have had such a large bleed off of students that now they don't have the funds because they've been providing a crappy education. And because they've been providing a crappy education, students have been leaving towards a private school. And so as they have this bleed off of private school students, the problem becomes that we have a funding issue, because if I have let's say I have 30 students in a classroom and I lose 4 out of 30, more than 10%, right? Let's say I lose 20%, I lose 6 out of 30. That's 24. Some costs do go down, such as the amount of supplies you need for that classroom, computers, what have you. But a teacher still, it's still the same amount of teachers, essentially. And so the problem becomes is that you haven't really reduced your costs. So the schools have backed themselves into a situation to where if we do funding off their current attendance records, because they've done such a crappy job, we now have to bail them out. So HB 208 is a funding bailout bill to schools to allow them to use their attendance records from the prior year for this year because they've lost so many students. And they've lost so many students in unenrollment that they won't have the funds. They're concerned to keep the quality of education that people are leaving in droves going that they need to. And so they say HB 208 is a school funding bill. Now, that being stated, it is a school funding bill. It just also has language in there that allows a school to remain NTI only. And the problem with remaining NTI only is that's going to create the bleed off even more because parents are leaving because of NTI only. So you're having a funding bill to fix a problem being created by NTI only while not addressing the problem of NTI only. You're making it worse. You're making it so much worse with this bill. And so HB 208 is crap as it sits. It was wrote by Regina Huff, or supposedly wrote, the original sponsor. As you find out, as you get into these things, you find out that these representatives do not write their own bills at all. They do not read their own bills hardly at all either. Because if they did and thought critically for 5 seconds, they would realize that the problem is NTI. You're allowing NTI to continue. And then you also are trying to overburden us, the taxpayers, with a school bailout bill, essentially, to help pay for the bleed off from NTI. So, now, there was 2 amendments on this, 1 and 3, that we were saying, listen, if 1, 2, and 3 pass, you can go ahead and do it. 1 and 3 were withdrawn, just leaving 2. But 1 and 3 were withdrawn. I am being told that there will be another amendment filed on this bill, Amendment 4 in this case now, and that will help fix the NTI-only allowance language and fix that issue. So if you go ahead and you look at that Amendment 4, once it's suggested, you may see us telling you to say okay on HB 208 only if Amendment 2 and 4 are allowed. However, until that case, we're saying no on HB 208. Email your legislators. Email Regina Huff. Tell her to withdraw her Bill 208 or wait to see the amendments on it, right? So maybe don't tell her to withdraw it quite yet because if the amendments come in and fixes it, it'll fix the NTI issue. I personally have an issue with bailing out the schools for making bad decisions. I say, teachers unions, you built this bed, now you lay in it. You lay in it because you're not putting our teachers first. You're not putting our kids first. You're putting your union first and your power and your ability to flex it. And so for that, you made your bed, you lay in it, you figure out how to deal with it, and then you turn around and tell these teachers and students why they should keep supporting you when the policies you were pushing for caused the problem. However, at the same time, I'm not willing to let our children be victims to us playing politics because of the teachers' unions, which they kind of was bent over a barrel in that way to a certain degree, but we can push back in some ways, and that's by changing the way we handle our schools completely. That being stated, HB 208, say no on it unless because we cannot bail out these schools if we're going to let them stay in TI. So once Amendment 4 comes, you'll see a different push on that. Next, no to HB 508. That is a gas tax. Under no circumstance will we say yes to that. So let's talk about what Representative Duplessis, who went ahead and put that out there, says about it. So if you message him about it, he says it's just an EV tax, which, it is an EV tax. It just says 5 other sections in it too. I believe 5. I know at least 4 other sections in it that have nothing to do with EV tax. So the road fund, generally speaking, just so you understand the road fund and our issue with it. So, and we'll talk about how we look about taxes here in a second with that too as well. HB 508, though, what it would do would allow, so every time they try to increase our gas tax, we all say no. Why? Well, for the same exact reason that I'll go into here in a second. But we all say no. It never does well because increasing taxes, especially as a Republican, will not get you reelected. So instead, what they need to do is change the way the gas tax is calculated so they can keep raising taxes on you without you realizing whose fault it is. So what they're doing is, one, they're adding an EV tax. And so when they have an EV tax, what they're basically saying is roads are paid for. A chunk of it is paid for the road fund. Some of it does come from the general fund as well. But the road fund has a couple issues with it right now. First, about 20-30% of it is being paid in servicing debt. They pulled out debt back in the 90s because of the way they calculate their road fund is at 9% of the wholesale price of gas. Well, it became real volatile, and they decided instead of, spending money they don't have, again, instead of not spending money they don't have, figuring out how to pull more money from the general fund to make it through the time or whatever, they decided they're going to pull out a loan for us to pay for in the future. So now 25-30%, I believe-ish, of the road fund goes towards just paying that debt, okay? Additionally, a good chunk of it does go to KSP as well, which we'll talk about here. The other day I made a video and I accidentally said billion. I meant million, but a good chunk of it does go to KSP as well. And so we'll go ahead and I'll talk about that here in a second. But what 508 would do is it would take it from being a percentage of wholesale and instead make it a flat tax, so a flat amount of money. And it would start off at the same amount that it is now, because wholesale has a floor right now, and I believe it's 24 cents, and it has a floor. And when that floor hits, when the wholesale price 9% drops below that floor, it just stays there. So they're going to put that floor in place, but now they're going to allow a 10% up to a 10% increase or a 2% decrease a year, depending on the national index for highway construction costs. Okay, so they're going to increase or decrease it based upon that. Now, I can see an argument to be made there. I can see an argument to be made about the EV tax. I understand the arguments you're making, but here's a couple things. First, you're lying if you say it doesn't increase our taxes, because the first thing it does is if the highway cost goes up 10% at least every year, in 5 years, we could see a 40% increase of tax without a single vote having to occur. That's a problem. We cannot put a law in place that allows a 40% increase of a tax without people voting on it. That's my first issue. Because if you know that money's coming, you say, well, we can just have the increase of tax, and then we don't have to worry about cutting anything back. And that goes into it. Before we raise a single tax, maybe we need to take a second and actually look at what we're spending money on. I tell you this much. If you can complete an audit of the state and tell me we are not wasting, and look me in the eye and say we are not wasting a single tax dollar, I will vote for a tax increase if it's needed. But I have a feeling that will never occur. You know why? Because I drive by government buildings. You leave your lights on. You just leave your lights on alone in these government buildings. Increases the cost. But let's talk about what goes into the road fund. So a good chunk of it goes to KSP. Now, I believe in, I'm not saying defund the police. However, let's take our personal situation. When we were dealing with our battle with the governor, one of the things that occurred was our ABC license got taken from us. We're still in court over that. And KSP was involved in coming out to take it. KSP was also involved in coming out to question me as if I was a threat to the governor to find out. Your road fund dollars went to funding that because it goes to KSP. So until KSP is only doing things as far as the highways go, or creates a division that's only funded by here, and all they do is deal with the highways, and they can't, and this group can't do anything else but use that money. Until that's the case, you cannot increase our road fund. Until you're turning off all the lights, you cannot increase our road fund. In such that I believe it was last year, or year before, the road fund, they wanted $50 million to pay for highways from the road, runways from the road fund. Do you know of a single, why are we paying for re-asphalting the runways of runways that commercial airlines are flying on? Why don't they pay for it? Why don't the commercial airlines pay for it? Are we not collecting enough tax to do that? They charge us a ticket. We pay a tax on that ticket. That should be going towards keeping these runways taken care of. Why is it coming from the road fund to pay for aviation? And I don't know if it was this year, last year, where they took out $50 million. I know in 2017, the graph I was looking at, they took $3 million-ish for aviation. But yet we need to do a tax raise. Cut that spending first. Show me you don't have the money first, and then we'll talk about it. But if you keep thinking you can come back to the well and pull more money from us citizens constantly, you have no motivation to cut spending. You have no motivation to figure out, should I spend money on this or should I not? And if you don't have that motivation, why would you try to cut costs? Remember, it's not your money. It's our money. And that's what you're spending is our money. And you need to make smarter decisions with it. I mean, when you have reciprocity going on still with legislators, which, so you guys know what that means. If you're a legislator for like 20 years and you're a part-time legislator, and then if you get a job in administration for like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then you retire, so you only work for the state actually for 5 years. Those are 20 years you're a part-time legislator. When it comes time for pension, they look at you and say you worked for 25 years at whatever amount 25 years full-time for the state instead of just those 5 years. It's BS. It is a way that these lifetime legislators can retire and end up getting, 60, 70,000 in pension from the state without having actually ever worked full-time for those 25 years. That's called pension reciprocity. It went in place back in the 90s. If that's not removed, why are we even raising tax? Let's remove that first. That costs us tons of money. Let's remove that first. But of course, that's not the case. And instead, we need HB 508 or else we can't have any roads to drive on. Don't you want roads? It's BS. Now, if you message Duplessis about it, he's going to say it's just an EV tax. He's going to say it doesn't raise your taxes. I sent him an email today and said, Duplessis, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because what's going to happen if you make it through a primary in 22, and I'm saying if, because if you pass a gas tax, people can be pissed. That gives you something to worry about. If you make it through primary, because if somebody's going to primary you, and if you make it through primary after being damaged and your money's drained, but if you make it through it, you're in the general, all they have to do is say you're a liar because you and I both know, this is what my email said, you and I both know that in 2022, our gas tax will go up without a single vote. You and I both know that. And when that occurs in the middle of the election season, all they got to do is turn around and be like, Duplessis a liar. He said to everybody, this won't raise your taxes. And then it raises your taxes in the middle of election season. That's something to run on and people will be upset about it. That is so stupid of Duplessis if he wants to keep his seat to do. He's going to be heavily damaged in the primary, and then he's going to come into a general with our gas tax being raised because of the bill he passed and being able to be hit on that real hard. I don't understand what he's thinking with this, but we need to say no to HB 508. If you feel like it, you can even email Duplessis and tell him he's stupid for doing it because it's going to hurt him in his election and it's going to cost him more dollars in his donations. But anyways, no to HB 508. SB 229, that's a red flag gun law. Basically, they're saying, well, COVID's causing all these issues like I covered earlier when I was talking about HB 208. SB 229, they say, hey, it's causing all these mental health issues. So what we need is a red flag gun law. As you guys may or may not know, a red flag gun law is nothing more than a law that states before you've been in front of a jury, they can take away your Second Amendment rights. That's BS. I don't know who thought of this. It's BS. No to SB 229. If anybody is Republican and votes for that, primary them out. I believe a Republican, I forget his name, proposed it. So somebody please primary that guy, and let's make sure that nobody helps him stay reelected because that's silly. Now, SB 213. We want to say yes to that one. Now, what that is it's almost basically a backup situation. So everybody knows Tuesday, tomorrow, is the last day to file new legislation. And so to understand why we need SB 213 on the docket and to be supportive, we need to sit there and look at what's going on with HB1 and SB1. So HB1 and SB1 are both bills that were meant to and are limiting the governor's powers. And when you're limiting the governor's powers as far as it goes, we've seen that the courts are going to jump in there. And so what the courts are doing are actually a lot dirtier than a lot of people realize. So when HB1 passes, and SB1 will be challenged as soon as it takes effect. And there's a reason why they're wanting to run out the clock. And the Judge Shepard, who's in on it, said we're going to put a stay of 30 days on this. So the problem is legislators have a legislative calendar. And if, based upon the court time it takes and everything else, if HB1 or SB1 is found because it's just like one line in there to be an unconstitutional law by the Kentucky Supreme Court based upon the Kentucky Constitution, and we all know that they've been terrible, and it's found to be that way, then in that case, that will run out the legislative clock. Legislators won't be able to fix it. So SB 213 is a kind of a backup to say, you know what, okay, how about we just end the state of emergency for COVID completely? We don't have to worry about touching and going in with a scalpel necessarily and removing his powers. If at the end of the day, we need to just end the state of emergency completely, that's SB 213. So we want to vote yes for that one because we'd rather just end the state of emergency to end his powers of as far as it goes with COVID. Now, I'm going to touch on that one here in a second, though, when I talk about what's going on with impeachment because it deals with that. So HB 360, that would return any licenses to any businesses the governor's taken away. Listen, obviously, we have a license taken away. ABC that we're dealing with, we can sell alcohol now. We got an administrative hearing. Obviously, that bill would help us, but there's a lot of people out there who are actually being hassled by ABC, and having the ability to sit there and say, hey, we're going to give you back these licenses, really will take the wind out of the sails of a lot of these boards and that are trying to take away your licenses. So HB 360 is a direct fight to say, hey, we're supporting businesses that are fighting against the governor. So we want to say yes to HB 360. Now, let's talk about impeachment, and let's talk about what the RPK is generally doing. So RPK discovered in 2020, Andy's good for business. And Andy's good for business because people hate him so much. And because people hate him so much, they're going to vote Republican more often because Andy's a uniquely unlikable jerk. And so because of that, they have decided that they don't really want to impeach Beshear. They've decided that they don't really want to do, in fact, the putting forward bills to get challenged in court is actually part of it too, because they don't actually want to solve your problem. See, they ran on solving your issues. They ran on saying, we're going to rein in the governor. I challenge to say, if you do not successfully rein in the governor, regardless of the issue, whether it's court or what have you, you have failed us. What they're also trying to do is to say, hey, we're going to continue to win even more seats from the Democrats because we're going to keep this governor in place. We don't want to impeach him because if we impeach him, he's bad for fundraising and we might lose seats because now it'll be on all of us Republicans to take care of it. And I understand that. And, tactically speaking, that's great. That's a great thing to say, tactically speaking. However, there's a couple things here. First, morally speaking, to understand why people are upset, it's because people are dying. Like, kids are committing suicide, adults are ODing, committing suicide, people are losing their livelihoods, people are losing their car, people are sleeping in their cars, people are homeless because of him. To understand why impeachment has a 2-to-1 ratio for support when you talk about voters who actually vote into the impeachment committee, the reason why it has that support is because of the damage he's doing. Well, he's doing all this damage, and you're sitting here saying, hey, it's good for business. We're going to get reelected. We're going to be real well off with it. Well, the problem is, RPKs, you're playing with people's lives. That is what you're doing. The reason why people are upset and he's so good for business is because of what he does. And one, I find it morally objectionable to be playing with people's lives in this way, to play party politics as you're hurting real people. You know, you want to play party politics with a couple percentage points of tax. You want to play party politics with a couple of loans or whatever have you, what have you. Okay, that's one thing. But to play party politics when people are committing suicide is reprehensible. And on top of that, the reason why they can do this is because we will reward them. We will not vote for a Democrat. We won't. And we won't because, and the reason why we pressure Republicans and not Democrats is for the same reason why we won't vote for one, is because you can't hold a Democrat accountable at all, because they're just not standing on the same principles that Republicans pretend to. Now, Republicans, when they pretend to stand on these principles, they're at least principles that we can attack them on when they don't stand up to it. So that is what they're thinking. Now, how we're fighting back against this thought process. First, I completely agree. I 100% agree. If Andy's not impeached, the Republican Party will maintain power. However, if you're in establishment, you're in leadership, you're on that impeachment committee, and you think you're going to maintain power without being so heavily damaged that it's going to be so detrimental to your political career, you are mistaken. You will have a primary candidate. I promise you, you will. If you're on that impeachment committee and you do not move it forward, you will have a primary candidate. Because what you've done is not followed what the voters wanted, but you have done instead what leadership wants you to do. You're not accountable to leadership. You're accountable to the people that vote for you. So, if you think you can keep Beshear in to help further RPK, you're correct, but you will not be a part of that success. We will systematically take you out. You will be removed from office eventually. I can promise you that, okay? There's enough PACs out there. There's enough groups out there. Liberty is a growing grassroots movement, okay? Liberty is growing to the point they can put boots on the ground to knock against you, all right? To think you're going to maintain power if you do this, you are mistaken. We know what you are. It's terrible, and we will remove you, period. We will. You'll be taken out of office. Now, if I'm sitting on the impeachment committee and I'm not an idiot, I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, I will lose my spot if I don't move it forward. I will lose my spot if I don't move it forward. So I have to vote to move this forward to at least the House floor, and then if they want it killed there, they can. And let's go over the charges of impeachment. It's not as if the governor's saying he didn't do it. He's saying he did. He's just saying it shouldn't be impeachable. So he's saying, I broke the law. Yeah, I broke your First Amendment Constitution. But, you shouldn't impeach me for it. That's his actual defense. And the impeachment committee is buying it. And what they should be doing is moving it forward to the House to where each House district can vote on it so your all voices can be heard, because this committee can strangle your voices up because they're elected by their 4 districts. But it makes it easier on us because what we can do is target that district. See, if it moves forward to the House and dies, it's really hard for me to target the 50 people that at least that would have voted against it. It's really hard for PACs to come along and target those individuals. It's just hard to come around and target 50 people. However, 4, that's easy. Mailers aren't that expensive. They're only 10, 20, 30 grand to run a mailer or 2. They're not that expensive. PACs will come along. They will raise money off of you being spineless. And then they will send out mailers in your area. They will. Because, quite frankly, to your point, a fundraiser, Andy's a great fundraiser. And a PAC can raise a lot of funds running you 4 out of office. So if I was you, I would move it forward to get the target off my back, turn around to RPK and say, I don't report to you, I report to my voters. And because of that, I'm moving it forward. If you want it killed, you kill it on that House floor where there's 50 targets. I'm not killing it in here when there's 4 targets and they can take me out. That's what I would say. But that would be if I'm on the committee and I'm turning to them saying, hey, listen, I politically speaking, this is untenable. Now, if I was on the committee, I'd say, oh, he broke the law. It's getting moved forward because, clearly we're a little more principled than most people on our like our principles or disagree with them. We're willing to go to jail for ours. So what are you willing to do for yours? That being said, just to general wrap it up. Don't stop calling. Don't stop emailing. Don't stop voicing how you feel about bills. Don't stop telling them how you feel about impeachment. Don't stop doing it. And the reason why is because, one, remember, your voices are not heard when you vote. That is the repercussions for not hearing your voice. Your voice is heard now. They can't claim they didn't know if you're not sending it in. That's first thing. Second reason why is to make sure they understand what I just said. We have to make it an untenable situation for them to vote against it to where they know they will be destroyed. Send them emails saying, I will donate to anybody who runs against you in the primary. I will donate to anybody who runs against you. And then I will encourage people in the general to not show up for you, because at the end of the day, I would rather, and this is me, I would rather have a Democrat that we can rally against, the same way RPK is rallying against Bashir in their minds to fundraise and everything else. I'd rather have a Democrat I can rally against to then put in a better Republican in 2 years than to keep your squishy butt in that seat, not doing anything and not having a spine. Because you're just as bad as a Democrat, and I won't show up to vote, and I'll encourage people not to show up to vote for you if you make it through a primary. And in a primary, I will donate to whoever you're running against. Because that is the situation. Now, I have to say, to anybody watching that is wondering what the fight's all about, at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself this question. What are you willing to give up for your liberty? What are you willing to give up? Because I can promise you this much. Higher taxes, hey, higher taxes, but hey, I get my free health care, I got my free food, my free house. That all's great. It's real great. And that's real comfortable. But you have to remember, what are you willing to give up for your liberty? Are you willing to give up your freedom and liberty just to ensure that, hey, I got a meal on the table, and I'm okay? Are you willing to give up your liberty for a little bit of security there? Because, that's the question. See, that's what, when the Democrats and liberals, that's what they're preying on. They're preying on people's concern about surviving in the sense of, oh man, how am I going to pay if I get sick? Or how am I going to pay with this? And if we get crony capitalism out of the way, we'll see a lot of those costs drop. A lot of them drop. And if we stop taxing people so much, they'd have more money and they wouldn't have to worry about how they pay for their health care. That being stated, what the Democrats and liberals do is they create a situation that sounds real nice. It's a really nice thing you tell us. You tell us, hey, we're going to pay for everything. You're not going to have to worry about it. Don't worry. We got you. We'll get you some money, right? When they talk, it's funny. When they talk about education. They talk about healthcare. They say, oh, it's the work of the people, everything else. It is great to have charity that does that. But you shouldn't have your government doing it. And you shouldn't, anybody who has the ability to put a gun to your head if you don't do something isn't a charitable organization, and nor should it ever be.